Hi, Kelly.
Hi, good, happy Saturday.
Well, thank you. Same to you. Um, we have a good audience today, so we are proud to introduce you to them. Uh, Kelly is an Orange County Assistant District Attorney. She cares very much about Orange County. She recently ran for the California Assembly and is very active in promoting good, clean, honest elections and works hard with Republican groups to make this happen. Kelly is married and resides in Huntington Beach. She has some very good information to share with you today. Kelly?
Well, hello everyone in Laguna Woods. It's really great to be here with you today and to talk about something I think is very current on everybody's mind. We are hearing so much about election fraud and what is happening across our country that I thought we should take a deep dive into what's happening in California. And so I've started asking questions. I don't think I have all the answers for you today, but I do have a presentation that I will share with you. And I just want to say from the outset, I do work as a deputy district attorney, but I'm not here speaking on behalf of our wonderful DA, Todd Spitzer. I'm here just speaking to you as an individual on my own. So anything I say is not meant to be said from the DA's office. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And we're going to talk about voter fraud and what that might mean for us here in California. So let me share this and make sure you can see my screen okay. So voter fraud. Is this something that's happening in California? We have heard so much about Dominion and the fraud in Arizona and Georgia and across the country. And just to get started, I want to make sure everybody knows the different states, different counties, it's all different and it's run with different laws, different election processes and procedures everywhere. So whether or not there is any fraud in California or in Orange County is a local issue. And so that's why it's important for us to not look at what's happening everywhere and just assume that it's happening here. So why is this important? I've prepared a short presentation. It's maybe part one because I'm going to tell you the, conclusion at the end is there are a lot of questions and maybe there is room for fraud in California and it takes a different analysis. So we're going to talk about California. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the new motor voter law in California. Look at some of the voter registration numbers and the changes over the last few years from before the new motor voter law went into effect compared to now in the most recent 2020 election. And then we'll have time for some discussion and Q&A. And I believe Phyllis has a few questions at the end. And so that's kind of a roadmap of what I've prepared for you. As I said, I view this to be almost like a part one discussion. I don't think I have all the answers today. And I do think that it's something that we should be looking at on a California level. So is there voter fraud in California? Well, the Secretary of State in California says yes, that there are common California Elections Code violations, and it's on the Secretary of State website, and it lists a number of different types of, quote, common election code violations. And so I copied and pasted some of them here for you. I took these from the California Secretary of State, and they are in charge of managing our voter registration along with the DMV. And then, of course, our local registrar of voters is involved in the registration and handling the ballots and submitting the ballots out for the vote, counting the votes. And so there are three different types of common violations that we have. And so here they are. So according to the Secretary of State, we have a problem in our state with people registering themselves or another knowing that they are not entitled to register to vote. There are people that are registering non-existent persons, including deceased animals and inanimate objects, to vote. Registering fictitious person or someone not requesting to be registered are all identified as common election code violations in our state. There are election day voting violations that are also listed as common election code violations. So electioneering within 100 feet of a polling place is not allowed. That's very common, according to the Secretary of State. Electioneering during vote by mail voting, receiving money, a gift, a loan, or any other valuable consideration for voting is listed as a common violation. Using or threatening to use any force, violence, or tactic of coercion to intimidate or compel people to vote or refrain from voting is a common election code violation. And of course, fraudulently voting in an election when you're not entitled to vote. That's a key recurring theme you will see. The third major category, according to the Secretary of State, is called nomination and election campaign violations, where the first one here deals with, candidates possibly filing false nomination or declarations of candidacy using the seal of a local government agency. Perhaps those two, I kind of put those together as being common violations in the nomination portion. But once again, voting or attempting to vote more than once in an election when you're not allowed to do that, that's a common violation in our state. Fraudulently applying for, voting, or attempting to vote an absentee ballot. So when you're asking that question, is there voter fraud in California? I think the answer is yes. And it's so common that the Secretary of State reports that it does exist. What the levels are and the impact of that, I think, is up to be questioned. I don't find any survey that really details this and gives us the facts about how much that and all of these things may have impacted any of our elections. But I wanted to talk to you about something that I think could be impacting what is happening in our state. And that is the motor voter law. And so I am a lawyer. And so I put on my lawyer hat, did a little bit of legal research for us. I would say I'm not the be all knowing all expert in all of this. So I'm just giving you an overview and hopefully raising some questions that I will come back to your club and answer, hopefully, in the future. But some of the questions I have come from some of the recent law changes. So we've had a motor voter law program in our state since 1993, probably before that. And we have used the DMV to help register voters, but you all probably know better than I do. You've worked hard to make sure people are registered, and we have the forms, the paper forms that people fill out. You've seen voter registration booths. And now, thanks to the new motor voter law, which was enacted in 2015, people essentially who are getting a license to drive are being automatically registered to vote. And it's called an automatic voter registration program in the legislative bodies that analyze these types of programs. And our program was enacted, but it wasn't really fully implemented until 2018. And it's operated through the DMV. And at this point, we're not alone. There are some good intentions behind a motor voter law and an automatic registration program, which is what they call it. And across the state, many states are turning to programs similar to ours. Right now, 20 out of the total number of states, right? And according to a national program that provided this data for me. And as part of that, we want to make sure people are voting. That's the intent, which is a good intent, but it could have ramifications and be a precursor to fraud. So if I go and look at the California new motor voter law, which I did, the good intent of making sure people are registered, and it's easy to register because you can do it through the DMV when you're getting your driver's license, is great. But there is no feature to require the DMV to audit once they have registered people to vote. And so, in fact, the lawmakers clearly knew that there could be a problem with people commonly known who vote when they're not entitled to be registered to vote. And what they did to make sure that the DMV wasn't liable is made sure that the DMV and their employees and officers and directors are not liable. They're immune from liability for any errors in the voter program that they are running. Not only that, but they recognized the problem and decided that they would make it a criminal violation for any individuals that vote when they're not supposed to. So the people that are in trouble here, if they are get automatically registered, are the individual voters who may or may not understand that they're allowed to vote or not allowed to vote. So what I think is there is a problem possibly where we know there are lawsuits alleging that there have been people that are deceased, are no longer alive, no longer live in California, are still on the voter rolls. And the DMV has no responsibility to audit or check the voter rolls to make sure that what we are sending to the registrars who send out the ballots and handle the elections for each county are getting proper voter rolls. So is there a possibility? I'm not saying that there is, but there is a possibility in the law because there is no audit. I think an easy fix to make sure that we are all comfortable with the law would be to add that and have a legislative change that would mandate that the DMV do some type of audit and fix and update the rolls before the votes happen. So let's look at, just for fun, I went back and looked at the voter registration data from before the new motor voter law automatically registers people to vote in our state unless you choose to opt out. That's the system that we have now in place. And as I told you, that was enacted 2015, but didn't really get going until 2018. And so let's look at the numbers. And these are different elections. 2014 and 2018 are non-presidential election years, so there's usually a lower turnout. But what I'm focused on is the total number of registered voters in Orange County in 2014, and I got these off of the Orange County vote.org website. They have the data that you can go and verify. Hopefully I didn't have any typos here, but that's where the data is coming from. But the total registered number of voters in Orange County in 2014 was 1,424,216. The turnout in this non-presidential year was 640,358 people voted in 2014. That was only 45% of the voter base turned out to vote. In 2016, this is a presidential year, so you usually would expect to see a higher turnout. The total registered voters upped a little bit, not too much, but 1,535,967. And in the election, 80% of the voters turned out, 1.2 million. Then we look at 2018. This is right about when we start enacting the motor voter law. Compared to 2016 and 2018, there's a tiny uptick of the number of registered voters, 1,558,988. And that was a non-presidential election year. This is taking all these numbers is from the November general election. 71% of voters turned out. Compare that to 2020, where we see a huge uptick in total number of registered voters to 1,771,537. And of course, we had a total turnout of 87%. So 1.5 million voters came out to vote in the 2020 election. So there is, if you can do, math here, over 200,000 additional registered voters between 2018 and the 2020 election, right after the motor voter law and the automatic registration of voters from the DMV takes place. Is that related? I think that it could possibly be related. I've not been able to find any studies or analysis of the impact of the motor voter law, except for encouraging statements by people that are very happy that we have it. So I don't know. I think that you could look at the correlation and see that that could be impacting the number of registered voters. And what we do know from news stories and various complaints that have been filed, and these are kind of some discussion topics we can go through, there are complaints that people are being automatically registered and their party status has been changed. So there are people that were complaining that they were a Democrat and now they're registered as a Republican or vice versa. There are people claiming that they registered and now they weren't receiving ballots and somehow the registration was canceled. There are many different allegations of problems, at least that's a good word to use for that, with respect to the registration operations through the DMV that have raised questions. And so there is also a lawsuit. There's a nonprofit called the Election Integrity Project. They have filed a lawsuit in California alleging many years worth of violations that happen at the polls. And some of those common election code violations we talked about at the beginning of the presentation are at the heart of this lawsuit. So these fraud or potential fraud and these allegations are not just from the 2020 election. And I think it's important for us to know that while there's what the CNN would call the big lie of the Republicans telling us that the election was stolen from Donald Trump in 2020, versus you have Republicans saying that the election was stolen on the other side and that there's massive fraud. In our own state, this has been a discussion that's been ongoing for years and years. This is not new here to have allegations that there is fraud in our elections. And so it's not just tied to the presidential election. This is an ongoing problem. The Secretary of State recognizes that it's a problem. So I think it's a valid question, and it's something that we should be looking into and ask our registrars of voters statewide to start answering some questions and doing audits and making sure that our voter rolls, most importantly, are cleaned up before the next election. So we'll pay attention to that Election Integrity Project lawsuit. It hasn't passed the motion to dismiss phase as far as I can see, but there are a lot of allegations of fraud backdating many years that are part of that lawsuit. And ultimately, what we all want is to have integrity in our elections and make sure that you feel that your vote is being counted. And that matters whether you're a Democrat or Republican or no party preference. We should all want to make sure that we feel that our elections have integrity and that our votes are being counted. So another issue that comes up a lot is ballot harvesting, and that did become a legalized method of collecting ballots. And so a lot of people believe that ballot harvesting could be one of the major impacts in the numbers of people that have voted. My chart that I showed you previously was about how many people were registered. So ballot harvesting has more to do with the turnout ultimately and getting the voters to vote. That's a different issue. But some people believe that ballot harvesting shouldn't be legal, and that was part of our history in Orange County of why we lost Republican seats a few years ago in the quote blue wave. And so that's something to think about and talk about. My presentation here is more focused on the registration angle and where the fraud might occur in the process of voting. And right now, ballot harvesting is legal, so we can't call that fraud if it's a legal process in our state. So one thing, importantly, I said at the beginning is if you want to really talk about election integrity in California, you have to understand how California works. And our motor voter program is unique to California. And the setup that we have here, we have the Secretary of State that is in charge and is one of the managers of the website that you can go to register, and also our local OC registrar of voters. So you may have heard of Neil Kelly, or at least you see his name on all of our ballots when we get our now mailed ballots. And so a few people have reached out to Neil Kelly. I don't have, a full answer for you yet on what is happening at our local level, except for I can report a few things. What Neil Kelly said when we asked him a few questions is that, he doesn't believe that we have the level of fraud here in Orange County that might exist other places. There are audits that take place and have been taking place. And I'll just read you from a letter that he sent from his own office. And he said, quote, "At my direction, we are the only California county to undergo a forensic audit of our general operations, including a focus on the validity of our voter registration records, tabulation, etc. Caltech University spent a year conducting the audit, scrubbing voter registration data on a weekly basis. So while Caltech did not have access to the ballots themselves, they were able to access the voter registration records and monitor the auditing process. And there is a detailed analysis and final report that is available at ocvote.com. And so locally, we have a registrar that is focused on making sure we're doing audits. Could he do more? Absolutely. I'm sure there are other things that can be done. But if the DMV is the one that is registering voters through an automatic process, in my conclusion, we need to look where the source of these registrations are happening. And so I'm working together. I do believe there will be a study, and getting access to information from the DMV to learn about their policies and procedures. One of the reasons I said I think this could be part one of a presentation, and I will come back and report to you what we find. And I do believe there are some additional people looking at doing audits. And so I think the questions that we want to answer are questions I think need to be directed to the DMV in the process to understand that. And when it comes to registration, perhaps the Secretary of State. And we do need to make sure that we are doing any necessary audits like Neil Kelly is doing here in Orange County across the whole state. And so when I say at my final bullet point here, when I look at this topic, and I'm giving you a very quick overview, not going into detail, so there's much more that could be covered that we're not talking about, but I do think many questions remain. I think it's a valid question to ask in California with respect to voter integrity. And I think we need to keep asking those questions and get answers, and ultimately make sure we do the audits to make sure the voter rolls are clean. And if we need to do that as soon as possible to have an election for the recall of Governor Newsom here in the fall, we need to make sure that we are comfortable when we have that election, if it happens, and definitely by November of 2022, when our next election will take place. And so I hope I can come back and report to you all on the work that will be done to make sure we do have integrity in our voting, if not by the election, if we have our election for the recall, definitely by the fall of 2022 when we have our next, or I'm sorry, I should say the primary of 2022 will be the next primary election, and then we have November of 2022. So that is all I have for you in terms of my prepared presentation. And I hope that this gives you a little bit of thoughts and things to think about. And I think you had some questions for me, Phyllis, and I'm happy to answer those questions and come back when I have even more answers for you in a few months or even early next year if you'll have me back.
Thank you, Kelly. That was really nice. We learned a lot on that one. And will you please let us know when you do have the update so that we can get you on this program? A few questions for you. We are constantly hearing about the term voter suppression. Republicans are often accused of this by Democrats and others. What can we do to combat this?
Well, that's a really good question. I think we as Republicans are often accused of being the ones doing the voter suppression, which I think is interesting. I don't agree with that. And if you do see voter suppression, I would say that that would be something you should be reporting to the police. It can be a crime, and it can be a violation of the elections code if as we have seen, if you are being threatened to vote or not to vote. And so I think we need people, I think they use the term, if you see something, say something. And ultimately, I think we need to be doing that. If you see something, say something, and people need to not be afraid to come forward if they do, so that we can make sure that that is not happening. We don't want to suppress the vote.
Thanks, Kelly. Another one. What can we do to get nursing home residents to register to vote? And if we are not allowed in, to make sure that Democrats are not being unfairly allowed in to register residents?
I think just like going anywhere, I believe, and what I think our government should be is our government. It's for the people, it's by the people, and we need to be talking to people one-on-one. We can make phone calls. We can talk to the people in the nursing homes. We don't have to physically go into the nursing homes to reach people there. And ultimately, it's not about Democrat versus Republican. We want to make sure that we are connecting with them. We are delivering our message to them. So we can do it by phone. We can stand outside the nursing home if we need to, but we need to make better relationships with the people that are running the facilities and the people that are in the facilities. And so it's pretty simple, back to the basics. It's not about anything except for talking to the people that are in the homes, I think would be the answer to that.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. Okay, here's another one. Since there is no way in California to check if non-citizens are registering to vote and are voting, since we are not allowed to check with immigration, can we somehow advertise that if you are illegal and vote, you are subject to fine and imprisonment to dissuade those non-citizens who are thinking of voting?
Absolutely, yes. That's the answer to that. And I will just add, that's one of the questions that I have asked that I want to get the answer to, is whether or not and what the procedures are at the DMV to make sure that non-US citizens are not registered to vote. I would tell you that my husband is a legal immigrant. He has his green card. He does not get a ballot. He's got a DMV, but he's not registered to vote. And so there must be some process, and I do have hope and belief that the process, hopefully isn't as bad as we think. But I do believe they do have warnings on the ballots that were mailed out that do say what the requirements are. I've seen the website lists specifically on the DMV and the Secretary of State, and it tells you if you are not a US citizen, you are not eligible to vote, do not register to vote. I do believe that they have made some attempt to give that warning. Some people have suggested, let's put billboards, let's do a better job, because do the people who are not legally allowed to vote really understand that they're not? And are these warnings sufficient? What I would really like to see is the data to know how many people were not US citizens and voted. We can figure this out. All we have to do is do an audit. We are asking Neil Kelly to do such an audit here in Orange County, and then we need to ultimately do that type of an audit statewide. This should be public information. If they know it's a common method of fraud, why aren't we doing a study to find out how many non-US citizens voted? So that's another reason I say I have a lot of questions. That's a great question. I do think there is some effort to educate people. Is it sufficient? I think we should study that more. And I'm going to be asking those questions to get more information for all of us to know what the impact is, because obviously that is a problem that's been recognized, and we will find out. So I'll be back and I'll report to you more fully in the coming months as soon as I have more information.
Great, Kelly. We'll be looking forward to that. Another question for you. If HR 1 is passed, do we have a plan to counter the mandates and protect the integrity of elections?
So once again, going back to the beginning of our presentation, what happens in California and what happens in other places might be different. And so I think the focus is on what we're doing in California. The motor voter laws, the ballot harvesting is what impacts our elections here locally. And so I think that we need to focus on doing our own audits in California and getting more information. And that is pretty much the same answer to that question, I think, is focusing on our own state and drilling down on what is happening here. I hope that answers that.
Okay, Kelly, thank you very much. That's our last question. And we appreciate your being here today. And we will look forward to seeing you the next time.
Hey, thank you for having me.